Welcome to A Guide to Every Deck in EDH. Today we are looking at Animar Soul of Element. So Animar is a 3-mana rug color commander. He's a 1/1, and he has pro white and black. Not that relevant, but can come up sometimes. But the bigger parts of his abilities are going to be whenever you cast a creature spell, put a +1/+1 counter on him, and creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast for each +1/+1 counter on him. So creatures trigger him, and then are less expensive depending on how many +1 counters are here. So obviously this can highly reduce the costs of any expensive creatures, and for colorless creatures specifically, it can reduce their cost to 0. So the plan is going to be either to get value out of Animar by putting a bunch of counters on him and then playing a bunch of big expensive creatures for much cheaper, or playing them for straight up free. And also the counters can just come from anything. They don't have to specifically come from casting creatures. So we're going to be going through them in category order. So first is the card draw spells. We've got Beast Whisper and Consecrated Sphinx. Also Oran Frostfang, which is another Tusky or Edric style creature, except the attackers also get Death Touch. And then a unique card to this deck is Mezio Mugger. Whenever it attacks, exile the top card of each player's library. You may play those cards this turn, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast those spells. So you can blitz it in so that it has haste, which only costs 3 mana or 1 mana if you have enough counters on Animar. And then it will exile the top 4 cards, 1 from each player. Now, it's not technically a draw 4 because you do have to play them on the same turn. If you hit multiple lands, you can only play one of them. If you hit a counter spell, let's say, or some other card that you can't cast immediately, you can't cast that spell. So it's not always going to be a necessarily draw 4. The max level, like the ceiling, is drawing 4 essentially, and lower levels is drawing less than that, but you will draw a fair amount of cards essentially for what is only going to be 1 mana a lot of the time. It is a shame that you can't repeat it, but it's kind of similar to like a Mold Drifter effect in that regard. So he's specifically good in this deck with Animar's cost reduction. Then of course we've got the usual Mystic Remora, Aristic Study, Library, Ring, and Time Twister. So moving on from there, we've got our combo pieces. So Ancestral Statue is the most obvious combo piece. It's colorless and it bounces a non-land permanent back to your hand when it enters, which can include itself. So once Animar gets up to 4 counters, it's basically free to cast and recast over and over and over. It will also trigger Animar, so if you have enough mana, you can potentially start with a Animar on the field that doesn't have the full 4 counters, and then get it to the full 4 counters with Ancestral Statue. So the statue will put infinite counters on the Animar, which makes it an infinite power attacker that can one-shot your opponent, at least one of them by attacking. And it also means that all of your creatures have all of their colorless generic costs reduced to 0. So this is combo piece number 1, obviously. And if you have anything that triggers on a creature entering the battlefield or an artifact entering the battlefield, this will also trigger that. Then we've got Baron Master Wizard. This is a typical combo piece with Dockside Extortionist, because if you can make it so that if your opponents have collectively, I believe, 6 artifacts/enchantments between them, then Dockside makes 6 treasures when it enters. So you need 2 to cast Dockside, and then you need 2 to activate Baron, and then you need an extra treasure so that you can sack one of the treasures in order to bounce Dockside back to your hand. But again, as long as your opponents have 6 total artifacts and enchantments, this goes infinite with Dockside. You can also just bounce other things if you need to, but sacking a permanent to do it is quite a steep cost. And then, like Ancestral Statue, Temur Sabertooth is also going to be in the combo creatures that bounce things back to your hand. This one does cost mana, but it can once again combo with Dockside. In this case, you only need 5 treasures total, 2 to cast Dockside, 2 to bounce it back to your hand with Temur Sabertooth, and it can, of course, bounce anything else back to your hand. So like the Mezio Mugger, for example, you can bounce it back to your hand before it dies. Then, of course, you have Walking Ballista. Once you have infinite counters on Animar, you can then play an infinite Walking Ballista and just shoot all of your opponents to death. And then Kinnon, because Kinnon doubles the mana production of any of your non-land mana sources, and is himself a way to filter into your combo creatures once you have enough mana to keep activating him over and over. So that is another way to go off with Kinnon. And of course, he also doubles the mana output of any treasures that Dockside makes. So if you're short on the amount of treasures you can make with Dockside, Kinnon can potentially get you up to the amount of mana you need to have it combo with Baron or Temur Sabertooth. Then we've got all of our typical counter spells: Fierce Guardianship, Flusterstorm, Force Negation, Force of Will, Mental Misstep, Mindbreak Trap, Miscast, Pack Negation, the Red Blast, Spell Snare, Stern Scolding, Swan Song. This is, of course, geared towards a CEDH metagame where a lot of these counter spells like Maybe Spell Snare, Stern Scolding, and like Miscast or Mental Misstep wouldn't necessarily be good in a more casual setting, but at least in a CEDH setting, these are better. And then of course cards like Fierce Guardianship are just generically good whenever. We've got our fast mana in Elvish and Simian Spirit Guide, Rite of Flame, Lotus Petal, and Tinderwall, either to get Animar out faster or just get anything else out faster. All of our lands, pretty typical, although it is a really short amount of lands and only 25 lands total. Also Boseiju and everything else is fairly straightforward, just typical Rug mana base. With the one exception being Forbidden Orchard, which is normally not very good because giving your opponents free tokens will add up pretty quickly. It also gives them free fodder for things like Culling the Weak and other sacrifice effects, but in this deck you're planning to just combo off before that's relevant. Then as far as protection goes, we've got Allosaurus Shepherd to make Animar and all of our other green spells uncounterable. It can also potentially make elves big enough, but that's not really much of a consideration in this deck. Deflecting Swat, of course, and Sylvan Safekeeper as a way to give mostly Animar hexproof. In our ramp section, we have 16 total ramp cards. We've got the fairly typical ones like Arcane Signet, Birds of Paradise, Carpet of Flowers, etc. Some more notable ones are Kinnon, of course, and Professional Facebreaker, which lets us attack multiple opponents to get multiple treasures off of it. The treasures, of course, also combine with Kinnon. Also, if you're ever in a position where you can make infinite treasures with Dockside loops, you can then use those treasures with Professional Facebreaker to cast the rest of your deck. So it itself is kind of a combo piece in that regard. And then everything else is pretty typical, all the talismans in our colors. For removal, we've got Alchemist's Retrieval, which is return target non-land permanent you control to its owner's hand for 1 mana, or any non-land permanent for 2 mana, and Chain of Vapor, and Snap. So the bounce spells are good to just temporarily get rid of either opposing creatures that are going to let our opponents combo, stacks pieces that we need to beat. So like Archon of Emeria, for example, will stop all of our combo chains, so we need to get those off the field. And they can, of course, bounce our own Dockside back to our hand to make more treasures. We've got Boseiju no Dwar, of course, the red blasts to kill blue permanents, and then Manglehorn is a bit of an oddity. So Manglehorn blows up one artifact, but then its secondary use is that it makes artifacts enter tapped under our opponent's control. This is primarily to shut down Dockside loops because it makes the treasures come down tapped. Although it can also act as a pseudo delaying stacks piece because it makes all of the opponent's mana rocks also enter tapped. I'm not personally too big of a fan of it, but if you're just interested in racing as fast as possible, like in this deck, it doesn't really matter that it doesn't stop the opponents activating their artifacts because by slowing them down for a turn, it at least just lets us combo off before they do. And then since all of our combos rely on creatures, so like, of course, Animar, but then Ancestral Statue, Baron, Kinnon, Temur, Sabertooth, Walking Ballista, and then Dockside, Facebreaker, etc. We do need to find these creatures, so we have lots and lots and lots of tutors to go find them. So Birthing Pod, Court of Calling, Eldritch Evolution, Fauna Shaman and Survival of the Fittest, Finale Devastation, Gamble, Imperial Recruiter, which can't find all of the creatures, but it can find some of them, and particularly Dockside, that's the big important one. Mystical Tutor for spells, Neoform, Shared Summons is good because it can just tutor up 2 creatures that combo with each other, although it is expensive. Spellseeker for more spells, Sylvan Tutor and Worldly Tutor, and then Weird Harvest. This is X green green. Each player may search their library for up to X creature cards, reveal those cards and put them into their hand, then each player search their library this way, shuffles it. So Weird Harvest is good in that, like Shared Summons, you can just tutor up multiple combo creatures and try to go off that turn. The problem with it is, one, it's a sorcery, so you need the mana to go off immediately, so you're adding 4 to whatever combo that you're about to do. And secondly, the more important part is, of course, that your opponents also get to search for creatures, which means that if you get disrupted when you try to go off, they can have searched up their own either combo creatures themselves or stacks creatures that will screw you. It's also a problem if they have any creatures that stop you from comboing that they can cast at instant speed, so some creatures might be things like Opposition Agent, Orcish Bowmasters, Solitude. Like, there are some flash creatures that may be able to disrupt what you're doing. And then lastly, these are creatures that didn't really fall into any specific category. So like Phantasmal Image and Metamorph as clones, Eternal Witness to get stuff back. Eternal Witness also combines with things like Sabertooth to just bounce it and replay it again to keep getting stuff back from the graveyard. Similarly, the clones can be bounced and replayed if you need to have a copy of something else. Although if you already have that thing, I don't really know why you need a clone necessarily, but they can just act as additional copies of something you already have. And then Wandering Archaic is 5 mana. Whenever an opponent casts an instant or sorcery spell, they may pay 2 mana, and if they don't, you get to copy it. So if your opponents don't pay the tax, you get to copy their tutors. It makes you kind of invulnerable to counter spells because it means that you get to copy their counter spells and then counter their counters. And because it's a colorless creature, of course, it gets cost reduced by Animar potentially to 0. And then the other side, probably you're never going to cast. Each player looks at the top 5 of their library and reveals a land and or instant or sorcery and puts the cards they revealed into their hand and the rest on the bottom, and each player gains 3. Probably never casting this, but it is at least worth knowing that you can do that, but primarily it's going to be on the front side. So that is Animar. So the main things you're going to be doing with this deck are you're going to be trying to land an early Animar as fast as possible, and then you're going to be looking to set up some kind of card advantage engine, either like Beast Whisperer, Sphinx, Mezio Mugger, or just get a combo down really fast, primarily Ancestral Statue, but it can be other things, and then just try to go off as fast as possible, and then win by either getting Animar up to infinite power and one-shotting people with it, or getting a Ballista down that's infinite and just shooting everybody, which you can do with various Dockside loops or Statue. And then the rest of the deck is just set up to support that, so all of the counters to protect that, all of the ramp and the fast mana to get going as quickly as possible. But yep, that is Animar.